Why would you ever touch a monster like me? The boy who loved the alien girl no one else would. It was an evening filled with elegance and the high expectations of corporate success. The venue was one of the most exclusive in the city, its towering windows showcasing the glittering lights of the skyline beyond. The air was heavy with laughter, clinking glasses, and the unmistakable buzz of powerful conversations. She walked through the crowd, her presence commanding attention. But there was a subtle weight behind her eyes, a weariness that no one noticed but her. She was used to being in control, used to making decisions that shaped the future. But tonight, she couldn't help but feel like an outsider in a world that seemed so out of reach. It was then that she saw him. At first, he seemed out of place. Dressed in a simple suit, his rugged appearance stood in stark contrast to the polished, well-dressed crowd surrounding him. But he wasn't like the others, and for some reason that intrigued her. He wasn't trying to fit in, wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply there. She made her way over, curiosity pulling her forward, and with a half-smile she found herself saying, "Just act like you're mine for tonight." It was meant as a joke, a way to take the edge off her discomfort, to laugh at the absurdity of her situation. But something about the way she said it, with a hint of challenge, felt different. His response took her by surprise. Without missing a beat, he met her gaze with calm eyes and said, "And why would you want me to do that?" His voice was steady, his expression unreadable. The question hung in the air, leaving her speechless for a moment. She expected him to brush it off, to laugh it off, to play along with the ridiculousness of it all. Instead, he asked her to think about it. Why would someone like her, someone used to being in charge, throw out a proposition like that? What was it really about? The words weren't just casual, they were genuine. And in that brief moment, she realized something. This man wasn't like the others around her, and she couldn't quite place why that was so unsettling. He wasn't impressed by her title, her money, or the expectations others placed on her. He didn't see her as a CEO, but as a person who was just as vulnerable as anyone else. Their conversation flowed naturally after that, and she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She shared her thoughts on work, on the constant pressure to be perfect, to never show weakness. She admitted, for the first time in a long while, how lonely it could be at the top. But as she spoke, he simply listened. No judgment, no forced empathy, just understanding. And it was that understanding that caught her off guard. For the rest of the evening, they talked about everything and nothing at all. She spoke of her struggles, her dreams, her hopes for something more than just success. He, in turn, shared the realities of his life, his dedication to raising his daughter, the challenges of balancing work and family, and the quiet pride he took in being there for her every day. There was no pretense between them, no walls to break down, no facades to uphold. Just two people talking, as equals, in a world that often made them feel isolated. As the night drew to a close, the CEO found herself standing outside, the cold air sharp against her skin. She was lost in thought, reflecting on the evening, on the unexpected connection, on the way this man had made her feel seen. And yet, she wasn't sure what to do with the feeling. Oh. She had just met him after all. It wasn't as though this was the start of something real, but he walked up beside her, offering her a simple smile. "Well," he said, "I guess that's one night done?" She nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and regret. "Yeah, one night," she repeated, though part of her wasn't so sure. Before she could say more, he added, "If you want, we can do this again sometime." Buy it. No pretenses. Just two people talking. Bray. It was such a simple offer, and yet it hit her harder than she expected. She wasn't used to people offering her something without any strings attached, without a hidden agenda. But there it was, an invitation, with no pressure, no expectations. "I'll think about it," she said, finally looking him in the eye. And for the first time in a long time, she realized that maybe she could afford to take a chance. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do everything on her own. Inspiration. And with that, they parted ways. The CEO went back to her life the next day, but the conversation stayed with her. It was as if something inside her had shifted, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, but it was there, quietly tugging at her thoughts. She kept replaying the moments from the night, his words echoing in her mind. No pretenses, just two people talking. She had spent so long keeping her walls up, afraid to show vulnerability, that she hadn't even realized how much she craved something real, something that wasn't driven by work or appearances. She wanted connection, true connection, not just with her colleagues or clients, but with someone who could see her for who she truly was. As the days passed, she found herself thinking about him more and more. Was it possible that he had seen through her, past the titles and the polished exterior? Could she really open up to him again, without fear of judgment or rejection? The temptation to reach out was strong, but there was still a part of her that hesitated. Could she risk it? Could she risk letting someone into her life when so much was on the line? She wasn't sure. But what she did know was this: the connection was real. And, even if it was only for one night, it had changed something in her. But maybe, just maybe, that was enough to take the next step. The next few days went by in a blur. The CEO tried to push the memories of that night out of her mind, but they kept returning, uninvited. At work, she maintained her usual composure, making decisions with the same precision she always had. Yet, there was an underlying restlessness. She couldn't stop thinking about the man she had met, the man who had seen her differently from everyone else. It wasn't that he had said anything extraordinary, but there was something in the way he listened, something in his calm demeanor that made her feel heard for the first time in ages. At work, she was always the one doing the listening, making the calls, pushing forward. But with him, it was different. It felt like he was a mirror, reflecting her true self. And it was a reflection she hadn't seen in a long time. Breaths. She hadn't expected any of it. The evening had started as a joke, an escape from the pressures that weighed on her. But now, it felt more like a turning point. She found herself wondering if there was more to it. She wondered if there was a chance that something real could come from this, something deeper than just a fleeting connection. And so, she decided to reach out. It was a simple text, nothing too extravagant. Just a few words. "Would you like to grab a coffee sometime?" It was a small step, but it was a step. She pressed send, then immediately regretted it. What if he didn't feel the same? What if he had only been humoring her that night? But then again, what did she have to lose? To her surprise, he replied almost immediately, "I'd like that." The simplicity of his response made her smile. There was no pretense, no games. Just two people agreeing to spend time together again. They made plans to meet the next morning, in a quiet cafe that wasn't too busy, a neutral place where they could just talk without the distractions of their worlds. The meeting felt easy, comfortable even. They sat down at a small table by the window, the soft hum of conversation around them. The CEO felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in ages. It wasn't the kind of calm that came from knowing you were in control, but rather the kind that came from simply being in the moment, free from expectations. They talked about work, of course. It was inevitable. But they also talked about life outside of work, the things that mattered when the world wasn't watching. He told her more about his daughter, his life as a single parent. How he had learned to balance everything: his job, his responsibilities, and his love for his daughter. She listened intently, amazed at how he spoke with such honesty and vulnerability. There was no wall between them, no hidden agendas. He was just a man sharing his truth. She, in turn, shared her own story, the pressure of her career, the expectations that were always hanging over her head, the constant feeling of needing to prove herself, to be more than what people saw on the surface. It was a feeling that had followed her for years, but now, sitting across from him, it didn't seem so important. Grasp. She realized that in his presence, she didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to wear the mask she had perfected over the years. She could just be. The hours passed unnoticed. The conversation flowed easily, and by the time they finished their coffee, the CEO felt lighter than she had in a long time. It was as if a weight had been lifted, just by being able to talk openly. She didn't know what this was, or where it would go, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't worried about it. She was just grateful for the moment, for the chance to connect with someone who made her feel understood. As they parted ways, he smiled at her, that same calm, reassuring smile. "I'm glad we did this," he said. "Me too," she replied, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. But as she walked away, she couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of something new? Or was it just another passing moment? Could she really let go of her guard and let someone in? The weeks that followed were filled with more conversations, more coffee dates, more moments of honesty and connection. Each time they met, she felt a little more at ease, as she found herself looking forward to their time together. And before long she realized that the connection between them was growing stronger. The thing that surprised her most, though, was how much she had changed in such a short amount of time. She was no longer trying to control everything, no longer hiding behind the walls she had spent so long building. She had learned that it was okay to let someone else in, to share the weight of her world with another person. One afternoon, as they sat together in a park, the CEO found herself looking at him differently. She realized that he wasn't just someone to talk to, someone to escape the pressures of her life with. He was someone who had shown her what it meant to be truly present, to live without fear of judgment, to embrace vulnerability. And as much as she had tried to convince herself otherwise, she realized she was falling for him. The thought scared her, but it also thrilled her. It had been so long since she had let herself feel anything for anyone. So long since she had let her heart open up. But now with him, she was starting to understand that it was okay to feel. It was okay to be real. And so, as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, she reached for his hand. Breath. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. Breath. He turned to her, his expression warm and understanding. "For what? For showing me that it's okay to just be myself." He smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "You don't have to thank me for that. You've always been you." Burst. "I'm just glad you're finally letting yourself see that." In that moment she realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a passing moment. Maybe it was the start of something real, something lasting. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to take that chance. As the days passed, the CEO found herself thinking about him more and more. Every time they met, she felt a little lighter, a little more at ease. He had a way of making her feel comfortable in her own skin, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The walls she had built around herself, the ones that kept people at a distance, seemed to be crumbling slowly, bit by bit. She didn't know if it was because of him or if it was simply time for a change, but she couldn't deny that she was beginning to see the world through a different lens. At work, she was still the same person, breaths, still the CEO, still in charge, but something had shifted. She wasn't as tense as she used to be, not as worried about keeping up the perfect image. She realized that her worth wasn't tied to her title, her job, or the expectations placed on her by others. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. She didn't have to prove herself every second of the day. It was during one of their conversations that he said something that stuck with her. They were sitting on a park bench, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the ground. It was one of those quiet moments where everything else seemed to fade away, and it was just the two of them, talking, without any interruptions. Breaths. "You know," he said, looking out across the park, "sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let go, to stop carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders and just trust someone else." She looked at him, her heart suddenly racing. It was as if he had read her mind. For so long she had carried that weight alone, convinced that she had to be strong for everyone. But now, with him, it felt different.
She didn't have to do everything on her own. She could trust him. And that was a new feeling for her.
She smiled softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so much of my life trying to be strong, trying to keep it all together, but maybe I've been wrong. Maybe it's okay to lean on someone else for a change."
His smile was gentle, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. He didn't say anything, but there was a quiet understanding between them.
She didn't need to explain further. He had been there, listening, without judgment, just as he always had. And for once, she didn't feel the need to hide. That night, after they parted ways, she walked home slowly, her thoughts a mix of excitement and uncertainty. She had never been one to let her guard down easily, but with him, it felt natural. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. And as the days passed, she realized that this connection, whatever it was starting to mean something more. Break. The next few weeks were filled with moments of joy, simple things like cooking dinner together, taking long walks, or just sitting in silence, each of them comfortable with the quiet. She started to feel a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't about grand gestures or fancy dates. It was about the small, everyday moments that made her feel seen, heard, and valued. But even with all of this, a part of her still held back. She wasn't ready to let go of her fears completely. What if this was too good to be true? What if, after all this time, she was still too broken to fully embrace the idea of love? The doubts crept in, as they always did, and she found herself pulling back slightly, unsure of how to take the next step. He noticed, of course. He always did. One evening, after they had spent hours talking about everything and nothing, he took her hand in his grip warm and steady. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You don't have to do this by yourself." Her heart fluttered, and she looked up at him, searching his eyes for any sign of hesitation. But there was none. He meant it. And for the first time she allowed herself to believe it. She didn't have to be alone anymore. She didn't have to carry everything on her own. The next day she called her assistant and made a decision. Risk. She was going to take a step back from the chaos of work. It wasn't forever, but she needed time to focus on herself, time to figure out what she wanted, and time to explore this connection that had slowly become so important to her. It was a scary decision, one that required her to let go of the constant need for control. But for the first time, she felt ready. Ready to let someone in, ready to be vulnerable, and ready to trust in something more than just her career. Over the next few months, she and he continued to grow closer, and with each passing day, her fears began to fade. The weight of her past struggles didn't disappear, but she no longer felt as burdened by them. She was learning to share the load, to lean on someone who cared about her, and in return, she found herself caring for him more deeply than she had expected. And one evening, as they sat together on the same park bench where they had shared that first deep conversation, she realized something. She had been afraid of losing herself in a relationship, afraid of giving up her independence, but now she understood that true strength didn't come from pushing everyone away. It came from allowing yourself to be seen, to be loved, and to trust that someone would be there to catch you when you fall. She looked at him, her heart full, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She had finally found someone who accepted her, flaws and all. And in that moment, she knew that this was just the beginning of something beautiful. A journey of love, trust, and shared dreams. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't always be easy, but it was real. And that was enough.